Welcome to Fool's Key Tarot. I'm Ben, and this is a daily reading for Saturday, June 21st, 2025. Let's see what the cards have in store for us. I'm going to draw 3 cards, one for the past, one for the present, and one for the future. Let's begin with the past. We have the 7 of Cups. Next, the present, the 4 of Swords, and the future has the Queen of Cups. All upright. We have 2 cup cards with a swords card in the middle. No major arcanas. So let's see if we can find the trajectory here, starting with the past. So the 7 of Cups has to do with fantasies and daydreams and thinking through a lot of options and imagining the hypothetical scenarios that would result if you chose each of the options. So very active imagination, very much thinking through in detail what would happen if you chose A versus B versus C. So it looks to me like in the past you had a major decision that you spent a lot of time thinking through, and you imagined what it would be like if you chose any of the options, and you spent a lot of time maybe daydreaming or thinking through the possibilities. You may have enjoyed the process of deciding, maybe even putting off making the decision because you liked having the options open. You liked thinking through what would happen. Maybe there were certain options that you knew you wouldn't take, but that were fun to imagine taking. And so it was exciting to imagine a world where you did something that you knew you probably wouldn't, but it was fun to think through that possible future anyways. So relevant to today's reading is some kind of decision in the past where you had many options and you spent a great deal of time parsing through those options and playing through the scenarios in your head of what each choice might lead to in the future. And so that brings us to the present, which would have been the future of this decision. And the 4 of Swords is a card of thinking and resting and recovering. So that ties into the 7 of Cups, because if you are having a moment of quietness and separation from the world, and the swords themselves are a suit that is related to thought and analysis, that ties into the 7 of Cups because this would be an ideal time to think through all of these scenarios. However, the 7 of Cups is in the past and the 4 of Swords is in the present, and yet they seem to touch on the same theme. So what I'm thinking here is that you haven't made this decision yet. You're still in the process of making it, and now in the present, in order to help facilitate the decision making, you've taken some kind of retreat or pause and have separated yourself from the world to try to get a better handle on your decision and the options that you have. Because even though you spent time in the past trying to think through or game out these options, you haven't been able to come to a determination yet, despite all of that time and energy spent. And so I think in the present, you are trying to set aside some time and make the final call. You've already put a lot of thought into this, but you have yet to determine which way you want to go. And the 4 of Swords indicates separation, and so that could even mean separation from your decision. Maybe you've been thinking about it so much that you've taken a pause from thinking about it. And sometimes when you step back from a problem or a question that you have struggled with, then when you come back to it after some time away, sometimes you find yourself thinking through it more clearly or differently, even though you didn't actually do anything in the interim to help. Just that fresh perspective that you gain from having been away from it can be enough to help. So you might be seeking a break from this decision, or you're seeking a break from your environment in the world around you in order to isolate yourself a little bit and take time to focus even more on the decision. So it looks to me like you are struggling with this decision, and in the past, you've already put a lot of effort into it, and in the present, you are changing your approach. Either doubling down and thinking even harder about it, and perhaps canceling other plans or getting away from distractions in order to focus even more on your decision, or taking a break from the decision, not because you don't want to think about it anymore or because you're giving up, but because you feel like you have thought about it so much that you need a break and will come back to it with a fresh mind. So this decision that's been on your mind for some time is still unresolved, and you're trying something new in the present to finally make that determination. And so that means that even now in the present, you have still not actually made the decision. Whether or not you're actively thinking about it in this moment, whether or not you are taking time to think harder about it or taking time to not think about it at all, either way, it's something that is still unresolved. And your current present state, I think, is relatively peaceful. I don't think that you are torn up over not making this decision. Maybe you are upset that it's not made yet and feel like you need to make the call, but I don't sense a strong urgency going on. I think that you have time. If you do have frustration over not having made this decision yet, it might be just your own internal sense of impatience rather than an external deadline that is pressuring you. So I think right now things are relatively peaceful on the surface, but deep down, you are very worried about this decision still. Even if you're trying to take a break from it and you're not consciously thinking about it, your mind is working on the background. That's actually a really good interpretation of the Four of Swords because it represents a break and a rest, but the swords are the suit of analysis and cognition. So the idea of trying to step away from something, but having your brain running in the background, maybe unconsciously or subconsciously, continuing to make progress on this choice, even as you try to separate yourself from it, that would really line up with the Four of Swords conceptually. So if you think that you are maybe getting away from the decision, you are probably still chewing on it in the back of your mind, and that's fine. That's a great way to get a different point of view. That's why when you return to the problem, it'll feel fresh. So if that process is ongoing, I don't think that that's a bad thing. It might mean that your rest isn't extremely restful, but that's okay because you're not really trying to rest. You're trying to make the final call, and a brief respite can be useful, but a true rest can be for later on once the decision is made. So right now you are trying something new. You've entered a new phase of this decision-making process, and it hasn't resolved yet, but you're trying something new, and you're hoping that that will lead to good results. Now, looking at the future, we have the Queen of Cups. So this could be a person who comes in and helps you make your choice. The Queen of Cups can be somebody who has a very piercing vision, and in particular, that could apply to the future. So this might be a person or a method of exploring these options in greater detail. So maybe talking to somebody about it and getting their input might help you shape these hypothetical scenarios that you've been running through your head. They might help you shape them more clearly. Maybe you've been having fun imagining these scenarios, but you're afraid you haven't been realistic or accurate. And maybe this is a person or a resource that could help you double check your work and think through the actual reality of these different options rather than sort of an imagined fantasy of what it could be like. So maybe you're looking for some more realism and some more accuracy in terms of thinking through the outcomes. Because of course, in order to make the best choice, you want to think through what happens if you make each choice. And so that's imagining the future, gaming out a set of consequences. And the Queen of Cups could be a person or a tool. It could even represent tarot cards, if that's your tool of choice. That can help you think through the outcomes and therefore ultimately make the right decision. Now, the Queen of Cups is also a card that can relate to dreams or subconscious influences that nudge us in certain directions, even if we're not really sure what these influences mean, or we might not even be aware that they're happening to us. It could be a dream that you're not sure how to interpret, but it gives you a certain feeling. It could also be a dream that you forget and aren't even aware that it's influencing your decision, but it affects your mood or it affects your feeling about one of the options. And so you might find yourself being drawn towards or away from a certain option, and you might not be sure why. Maybe it's a dream that you don't remember. Maybe it's a subtle stimulus that you saw during the day while you were awake that is lodged in your mind and influencing your decision making in subtle ways. So this wouldn't be necessarily a direct piece of evidence, but rather maybe even just a coincidence in terms of a word or a phrase or an image that you see that locks in your mind and informs your decision making process somehow. But the Queen of Cups is a card of subtlety. And so I think this is something that might be acting beneath the surface. So it's probably not something that you are going to consciously notice and go, oh, that idea or that concept is relevant to my decision making. I should include that in my analysis. The Queen of Cups is more like a subtle, tiny little nudge in a certain direction that you might not ever trace back to its original source, but it does push you in one direction or another. And because she's in the upright position, I think the cards are encouraging you to let this influence guide you. So if you're more intuitive or more aware, then you might notice this influence acting upon you. You might remember your dream, or you might be able to think through how your mind is working enough to trace back to the source of a new feeling or a new thought. If you find yourself feeling more or less drawn to one of these options, you might realize, oh, I heard this thing on the radio or saw some advertisement or a friend said something or I saw something when I was, out and about that sort of has a bearing on the situation. And I guess that's why I'm thinking in this new way. So if you're highly attuned to your own mind and your own thought process and to your environment, you might be able to figure out what this influence is. It's subtle, but not necessarily inscrutable. But it might be something that remains mysterious to you, and that's okay as well. You don't necessarily have to know where this guidance is coming from. If it feels right, then it probably is right. So I think that, especially with the Four of Swords indicating rest and the Queen of Cups possibly indicating dreams, I could definitely see this being a dream that you either remember or don't, but that ends up helping you think through these options. And if it's been on your mind a lot, then it makes sense that you would be dreaming about it. So I think a very strong possibility here is that during this moment of rest or reprieve, whether or not you're trying to think about your decision, because like I said, it's possible that you are taking time off to focus even harder on the decision. It's also possible you're trying to get separation from the decision and not even think about it. But either way, your brain might be chewing on it and therefore might have a dream that has to do with it. And in that case, that dream is going to be something that helps you determine your own thinking and get better insight about what it is that you really want. But the dream is still just one scenario. The Queen of Cups can definitely represent a person. The court cards of the tarot often represent people or groups who appear in your life. So I think that what the cards are saying is that you've been thinking about a certain set of options for a long time. And because you still haven't been able to make the decision, you're trying something new in the present that probably represents or includes some kind of break or rest or separation from the problem or question, or separation from the world in order to focus more directly on the problem. And what the cards are preparing you for here in your future, I think pretty near future here, is that as a part of this rest or break, there will be some subtle influence, such as a dream or a piece of visual stimulus or something that you hear that nudges you in one direction or another, but it's not really the influence itself that is going to nudge you one particular direction. It's how you interpret it. So if it is, for example, something that you overhear or see somewhat randomly, there's not going to be an explicit endorsement of any one option in that actual piece of stimulus. It's really going to be the way that your brain takes that stimulus and internalizes it and applies it to the problem at hand. So in that sense, even if this stimulus is completely random, it still is going to give you an important insight into your own thinking. And I think right now, one of the main things you're trying to figure out is what do I really think? I've imagined these scenarios. I can find good reasons to choose option A, but also with option B, and they all have their own pros and cons. And I think that you don't know what you're really thinking and what you're really feeling. So you want to gain some clarity into your own mindset, and the Queen of Cups is going to offer that to you. And that can take a lot of forms: a dream, a piece of stimulus, or a person who helps you think this through. It could definitely be a psychic or somebody who is particularly suited to helping you think through this scenario, like a counselor or a therapist or anybody who is trained or dedicated to helping people understand their own minds and make difficult decisions. But it could equally just be a person in your life who understands you is gonna help you see yourself better. It might even just be somebody who you talk to and they don't really give you anything back that's specific, like a piece of advice or an insight that you didn't have, but sometimes just having that conversation and exchanging emotion and feeling, bouncing off of that person and having your own energy reflected back at you, sometimes that's enough to figure out more about what you're thinking and what you're feeling and what would be good for you in the future, even if this person actually doesn't have anything specific to offer. It could just be their presence that is helpful. And in that case, it's probably somebody important to you, like a family member or a friend, or even like a boss type figure. This could definitely be somebody who is in a position of authority. And so maybe it's not somebody who you are extremely friendly with, but maybe they can offer advice in this situation for some reason or another. And so look to any source of knowledge or wisdom that might help in your situation. And don't just take literally whatever is said or heard from that source. Filter it through your own mind and see how your gut and how your instinct applies that piece of information to your situation. Because once it's filtered through your own thinking, then it becomes a hint as to what's really going on in your mind. Because I think deep down you already know which decision to make, but you're having a hard time accessing that information. And getting insight into our own mind can be surprisingly difficult. You'd think it'd be easy because it's your own brain, but what's going on beneath the surface can sometimes be very hard to pull up onto the surface. And the Queen of Cups represents the force that is going to help you do that, whether that's a person or a dream or just a random piece of sound or visual or even a smell that you come across and it reminds you of something or evokes a certain sense in your mind. Definitely something subtle, probably not a direct piece of knowledge or evidence, and almost certainly not a direct instruction like somebody just telling you which option to pick. I don't think that's what's going to happen here. It's going to be somebody who helps you figure out your own mind, helps you figure out what you're thinking and what you really want. So the good news is that I think your decision will get made soon. I think you've been thinking about it for a while and might be a little bit frustrated or impatient, but you want to make sure that you make the right call. And so that's why you're taking your time, and that's why you're trying a new method. And I think this new method is going to work because the Four of Swords, being a card of rest and separation, can absolutely lead to the insights from the Queen of Cups. So I think your current trajectory is good. Whatever your new method is to solve this problem is going to lead to something useful, but you have to be open to it because it might be subtle and it might be unusual and it might be something that is beneath the surface. And so you need to be very open to anything that could help, even if it seems irrelevant or like it might not help. So the cards are telling you to increase your awareness and open yourself to any kind of influence that might help you make your decision. And if you haven't tried a new method recently, if you haven't taken a break or tried getting separation from the question that you're mulling over or tried some kind of new approach, then the cards are telling you that a new approach is needed of some kind. So if you're already trying something new, then I think the cards are saying that that's going to lead to success as long as you remain open to subtle influences. And if you're just stuck in the decision-making process and you haven't actually tried a new method yet, then the cards are telling you that you do need to shake it up a little bit, and that probably some kind of separation or rest or break is going to be what's needed, because that will open yourself up to these kinds of more subtle influences. If you're in a busy environment and surrounded by all kinds of things, it's harder to notice tiny little influences or nudges. So that stillness and that calmness can bring you to a place where you're ready to receive the wisdom of the Queen of Cups. But whether or not this break or this separation or this rest, it can go in two very different directions. It could be a break from the world in order to focus on your question, or it could be a break from your question, which is the exact opposite direction. But the good news is either one will lead to success, because even if you're trying to get away from the problem at hand, there can still be ways that you gain information and insight. And the Queen of Cups is going to help you do that. You just have to be open to her. And the way to do that is to be calm, get away from your normal environment, get away from just a little bit, not permanently. It doesn't have to be a huge dramatic separation where you head off into the countryside for weeks. It can just be a tiny little moments you take for yourself, rests, meditation, a walk that you take alone, or with if the Queen of Cups is a person, this might represent time alone with this person, where you're more restful and calm, but exchanging ideas and reflecting things off of each other. So look for guidance from a subtle place, and take some kind of rest or break from something. But whether or not the thing that you need to break from is the question at hand or the world around you, that's going to be something that you have to decide. But I think that you're going to resolve this question or problem that you've been working on for a long time soon. Just be ready for any kind of help, even if it doesn't take the form that you expect, or a form that doesn't seem immediately helpful. But once you think it through and let it digest a little bit and filter through your mind, then it will become helpful. So just be ready to think creatively and be open to whatever the Queen of Cups has to tell you. So if you enjoyed this reading, then subscribe to see more. And if you'd like to learn about tarot cards or try some of my online guided readings, then head on over to foolskey.com where you can check that out. Thanks for watching, and see you tomorrow.